Lecture 30, Neuroprosthetics for Cognitive Enhancement. From Therapy to Enhancement, a New Frontier. We begin not in the realm of deficit, but on the frontier of potential. For centuries, medicine has focused on treating disease. Neuroprosthetics, too, have followed this path, restoring movement to the paralyzed, hearing to the deaf, vision to the blind. But what happens when we turn this technology not toward repair, but toward augmentation? What if neuroprosthetics leave the hospital and enter the boardroom, the classroom, or the battlefield? This is the domain of cognitive enhancement, where the goal isn't to fix what's broken, but to boost what's already working, to improve the brain's ability to think, remember, focus, and learn through direct neural interfacing. The term, cognitive enhancement, is loaded. To some, it conjures images of flashy nootropic pills or dystopian mind control devices. To others, it raises ethical alarms about engineered super-intelligence and inequality. But for neuroengineers, cognitive enhancement via brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, is neither hype nor sci-fi. It is a concrete set of technical challenges and experiments happening right now. The goal is deceptively simple on its face: use technology to make normal cognitive function better. How can we sharpen attention, expand working memory, accelerate learning, or boost creativity by directly interacting with the brain's signals? These questions are no longer theoretical. Researchers are actively testing prototypes in labs and even in early human trials. It's worth noting that the desire to enhance cognition is not new. Humans have always sought an edge, from drinking coffee before an exam, a crude neuromodulator, if you will, to Victorian-era thinking cap contraptions that applied gentle electric currents to the scalp in hopes of increasing intelligence. Yes, even in the 1800s there were electrified headbands marketed to boost brain power. The wild brain hack ideas of today often have quirky precedents. What is new is our sophisticated understanding of the brain and the advanced tools now at our disposal. We're no longer guessing in the dark. We can record neural activity in real time, decode aspects of cognitive state, and deliver tailored stimuli to specific brain circuits. In other words, the proverbial thinking cap might finally become a reality, grounded in neurophysiology rather than snake oil. Yet, what does it actually mean to enhance cognition, and where in the brain should we intervene to do it? The brain isn't one simple organ, it's a collection of networks performing memory, attention, decision-making, and more in concert. Should we stimulate the prefrontal cortex to improve working memory? Read out attentional focus from parietal cortex and feed it back to the user in some clever way. Synchronize oscillations across distant regions to speed up learning. These are the kinds of strategies on the table. They sound futuristic, but versions of each are being tried as we speak. To appreciate how far this field has come, let's dive into a few core cognitive domains that researchers are targeting, and explore what's been attempted so far. Sharpening focus, hacking attention. Let's begin with attention, that elusive yet essential cognitive resource. Anyone who's tried to finish a thesis in a noisy cafe knows how valuable a good focus can be. Neuroscientifically, one of the best studied brain targets for modulating attention is the parietal cortex, specifically areas in the intraparietal sulcus, IPS, and nearby posterior parietal cortex. These regions act as an attentional spotlight controller, helping us allocate mental resources to a location or task. When you prepare to pay attention to something, say, watching a spot where a stimulus is about to appear, neurons in these parietal areas ramp up their firing. It's as if the brain is saying, ready and focusing, now. This insight means we have a handle on an observable signal of attention. If we can record activity from the parietal cortex in real time, we can gauge a person's focus. Several research groups have built neurofeedback systems around this idea. In a typical setup, a person might wear a cap of EEG electrodes that non-invasively measure brainwaves, or if they are an experimental animal, have implanted electrodes for more direct recording. The system continuously analyzes markers of attention, for example, certain EEG patterns like an increase in frontal midline theta waves or a decrease in occipital alpha rhythms when concentration flags. The trick is then to close the loop. When the system detects the user's mind is wandering, it delivers feedback. This could be as simple as a subtle auditory tone or a visual cue that says, "Hey, focus." Even this simple feedback loop can yield improvements. Imagine a gentle ding in your headphones whenever your brain drifts off during a tedious task, like a little meditation teacher living inside your computer, nudging you back to the breath. Studies using such EEG-based neurofeedback during sustained attention tasks, like watching for rare signals on a screen, have shown modest but significant benefits. Over multiple training sessions, users learn to self-modulate their brain activity in beneficial ways. They might sustain focus longer and have more consistent reaction times. Meta-analyses suggest that while the effect sizes aren't mind-blowing, they are real, particularly for individuals who start with attention difficulties. Interestingly, the improvements often persist for weeks after training, hinting that the brain is actually rewiring itself, increased synaptic efficacy or network efficiency, as a result of this practice. It's neuroplasticity in action, the brain getting better at focusing by practicing focusing with real-time guidance. Feedback, however, is just one side of the coin. The other side is direct stimulation. If the brain isn't focusing as we'd like, can we push it toward a more attentive state electrically or magnetically? One approach is transcranial alternating current stimulation, TACS, a non-invasive method that applies tiny oscillating currents through the skull to entrain brain rhythms. By targeting frequencies associated with attention, such as the alpha band, (10Hz), linked to idle or idling visual processing, or theta band, (6Hz), linked to focused attention and working memory, scientists have tried to literally tune the brain's internal rhythms. Think of it like adjusting the tempo of a musical ensemble so that all sections play in sync. Early studies indicate TACS can nudge these rhythms and produce subtle changes in performance. For example, slightly improved detection of faint signals or better consistency in attention over time. The changes aren't dramatic, you won't turn into a Zen monk or Sherlock Holmes just by a zap of TACS, but they're measurable. It's as if the brain, given a rhythmic prod, can more easily lock into a focused state. Going more invasive yields even stronger effects, as usual, with greater risks and complexity. In non-human primates, researchers have implanted microelectrode arrays into areas like the lateral intraparietal cortex, LIP, a region involved in eye movements and attention. By delivering tiny electrical pulses to lip neurons while a monkey performs a visual attention task, scientists found they could bias the monkey's attention. For instance, if a microstimulation is timed just so, the monkey might be more likely to notice a faint target in a particular location or be quicker to shift gaze there. In essence, the stimulation was amplifying the internal, "hey, look over here," signal in the brain. This tells us that attention isn't just something to read out, it's something we can write in. It's a manipulable variable, a lever we can pull. The ability to causally influence attention with stimulation is a powerful proof of concept. Not only can we detect when someone's losing focus, we might also directly boost that focus when needed. As a light-hearted aside, one can't help but imagine future students cramming for exams with focus implants, keeping them on task. Daydream too much and buzz. A tiny pulse keeps your thoughts on the straight and narrow. It's almost like having your strict third-grade teacher inside your skull, minus the ruler snaps. Of course, reality is more nuanced and we're far from any consumer gadget that guarantees instant concentration. But these foundational studies in attention set the stage for more advanced cognitive prosthetics. They show that attention can be measured and modulated via BCIs, at least to a degree, which is the first step toward any true enhancement. Turbocharging memory, beyond 7 plus or minus 2. Another prime target for cognitive enhancement is memory, both the short-term, working, memory that holds information in mind for seconds, and the longer-term memory involved in learning new information. Memory is often likened to the brain's storage system, but in truth it's an active, rhythmic process. Neuroscientists have zeroed in on key memory hubs that BCIs might influence. The prefrontal cortex, especially the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC, is crucial for working memory. Think of it as the brain's scratchpad or RIM, holding a phone number just long enough to dial it. Meanwhile, the hippocampus and connected medial temporal lobe structures are vital for forming and retrieving long-term memories. Think of these as the brain's hard drive for declarative facts and events. Let's talk working memory first, the ability to hold and manipulate information over short time spans, seconds to minutes. If you've ever done a challenging, MBAC, task or tried to keep a new password in mind, you've felt the burn of working memory. The prefrontal cortex is working overtime in those moments. Intriguingly, neurons in PFC don't work alone, they oscillate in coordination with other brain regions. Research shows that theta-gamma coupling, lower frequency theta waves coordinating with higher frequency gamma bursts, in frontal and parietal circuits is a hallmark of active working memory. It's as if theta rhythms provide a timing scaffold on which gamma activity encodes individual items. This finding has inspired attempts to boost working memory by synchronizing or enhancing those rhythms. In a landmark study a few years ago, scientists tried phase-locked electrical stimulation in the lateral PFC of epilepsy patients who were already undergoing brain recording. Patients performed a memory task, like remembering a list of words or a pattern. When the researchers applied tiny electrical pulses in sync with the patient's own theta oscillations, the patient's memory performance improved, they recalled more items or made fewer errors. But if they stimulated out of sync, deliberately off the natural rhythm, performance actually worsened. In other words, there appears to be a right time in the brain's wave cycle to intervene. Hit that window, and you amplify the neural processes underlying memory. Miss it, and you might scramble those processes. This phase-specific effect is a beautiful illustration of how timing is everything in neural systems. It's like trying to give someone a push on a swing. You have to push at just the right moment in their arc, too early or too late, and you'll slow them down instead of speeding them up. Non-invasive approaches have mirrored this concept. In 2019, a team at Boston University demonstrated that delivering synchronized TACS at two frequencies, one targeting frontal theta and another targeting parietal gamma, could revive working memory performance in older adults. People in their 70s performed a working memory task as well as people in their 20s after about 25 minutes of carefully calibrated stimulation. Essentially, the stimulation helped restore the brain's natural rhythm coordination that tends to degrade with age. It was like a neural tune-up, temporarily reversing the cognitive clock. While the effect wore off after some time, it opened eyes. If we can do this with surface electrodes and clever timing, imagine what more finely targeted or longer-term neuroprosthetics could achieve for memory function. A cheeky headline at the time read that scientists made 70-year-olds think like 20-year-olds, a bit hyperbolic, but not entirely false in terms of that specific task. Moving to long-term memory and learning, the hippocampus is the star. Just last lecture we discussed memory prosthetics that aim to restore lost function, for instance, in people with hippocampal damage. But here we look at enhancement even when the hippocampus is healthy. The hippocampus naturally encodes experiences into memory through complex firing patterns often organized by theta oscillations. Researchers figured if they could capture the neural pattern of a well-encoded memory, maybe they could play it back to strengthen new memories. In one intriguing study, participants with epilepsy, who had electrodes implanted for clinical monitoring, played a memory game of associating images. By analyzing hippocampal activity, the investigators identified neural firing codes that corresponded to successful memory formation. Later, when participants were learning new image pairs, the BCI would detect suboptimal memory encoding in real time and then stimulate the hippocampus with the previously recorded good pattern. The result? Improved recall of those image pairs later on. In fact, memory performance jumped by roughly 30 to 35% compared to baseline in some cases. That is a huge boost, considering no new drug or study technique was introduced, just well-timed brain stimulation delivering the brain's own ideal rhythm back to itself. It's like the hippocampus got a carefully timed jolt of, do it like you did last time, but better. Findings like this verge on a scenario out of Limitless, the film where a magic pill grants super memory, except here it's an implant and algorithm doing the trick. One participant supposedly quipped that it felt like his brain just worked better for remembering those specific images, without him consciously feeling anything different. Of course, it's not magic. The stimulation simply reinforced the hippocampus's natural encoding process at just the right moments. This closed-loop hippocampal prosthetic exemplifies the mantra that has emerged across these studies: listen before you speak. In other words, closed-loop systems, which continuously read the brain's state and intervene only when appropriate, consistently outperform open-loop approaches that stimulate on a fixed schedule regardless of context. The brain is a moving target. What helps 1 second could hinder the next if the brain's internal state changes. Successful cognitive enhancement rides on being responsive and in tune with the brain's own dynamics. Before moving on, it's worth highlighting how broad the potential applications of memory and learning enhancement are, even as we acknowledge they're in early stages. We're talking about possibly reducing everyday senior moments. Where did I leave my keys? What was I saying just now? Helping students learn material faster, or aiding professionals to retain complex information with less effort. One can even imagine creative uses like stimulating associative memory to boost creativity or out-of-the-box thinking, though measuring that is a challenge in itself. But as tempting as it is to dream of superhuman memory, these possibilities raise hard questions. How do we define success in cognitive enhancement? If you stimulate someone's brain and they score 15% better on a memory test but then sleep poorly or feel anxious, is that a win? Is enhancing raw memory span always desirable, or could it have downsides? E.g., remembering too much trivial detail can actually cloud thinking, a real-life first moonwalking with Einstein scenario, or Borges character Phineas who remembered everything and was bogged down by it. The brain has evolved to be efficient, not to record everything like a camcorder. A little forgetfulness and filtering is healthy. So if we artificially boost memory or focus, we must be careful not to disrupt the balance and flexibility that make cognition useful in the real world. This theme of balance, of enhancing without unbalancing, will appear again when we consider the ethics and safety. Designing the ultimate cognitive BCI, architecture and algorithms. So, how do we actually build a system that enhances cognition while respecting the brain's complexities? It's not as simple as strapping on an electrode cap and turning up the voltage. We need a smart architecture, one that mirrors the brain's own modular, adaptive nature. In practice, most cognitive neuroprosthetic designs are closed-loop systems with several key components working in harmony. Let's break down the typical architecture of a cognitive enhancement BCI. Signal acquisition. First, the system needs to listen to the brain. This could involve invasive electrodes, like multi-electrode arrays inserted in cortex or electrocorticography grids laid on the brain surface, for high-fidelity signals, or non-invasive sensors, EEG, MEG, FNRS, that trade some precision for safety and ease. The choice depends on the application. Invasive methods capture spikes and local field potentials with millisecond timing, great for fast cognitive dynamics, whereas EEG or FNRS might only give coarse signals but are far easier to deploy in healthy users. Temporal fidelity is crucial here. Cognitive processes operate on fast timescales, hundreds of milliseconds or less. If your system is too slow to notice a brief lapse in attention or a fleeting memory encoding event, you've missed the moment to help. That's one reason even non-invasive setups strive to be real-time. Think high-density EEG with good filtering for near-instant detection of brain states. Pre-processing and feature extraction. Once signals are streaming in, the next module separates the signal from the noise and pulls out meaningful features. The raw brain signal is a cacophony of activity. The BCI has to tune into the relevant frequencies, spikes, or patterns that correlate with cognitive states. For example, if the goal is to enhance attention, the system might focus on features like frontal midline theta power or parietal alpha suppression time to moments when attention is required. If working memory is the target, it might compute the strength of theta, gamma coupling in prefrontal leads during the memory retention period of a task. Preprocessing might include filtering out muscle artifacts, aligning neural data with external events, like stimulus onsets or user actions, and maybe even doing some principal component or independent component analysis to isolate brain sources. By this stage, instead of a raw EEG trace, the system might have a value like attention level equals 0.7 or memory network synchrony equals 55% of optimal, simplified descriptors of the cognitive state. Inference engine. Decoding. Here lies the brain of the brain interface. The inference module takes those features and decides whether and how to intervene. The simplest approach could be a set of if-then rules or thresholds, e.g., if attention level drops below X, then trigger an alert sound, or, if hippocampal theta power indicates poor encoding, then deliver stimulation pulse. Many early systems used such rule-based logic because it's interpretable and straightforward. However, human cognition is complex and doesn't always abide by fixed thresholds. Thus, more sophisticated BCIs employ machine learning classifiers or even deep learning models. They might be trained on examples of good vs bad cognitive state from previous data, learning patterns that distinguish, say, focused vs distracted brain activity. Some research has used recurrent neural networks that track the temporal evolution of cognitive state, essentially trying to forecast if the user is about to mentally crash, like an imminent lapse in attention, and proactively intervene. Adaptive learning and personalization. The real innovation and challenge in cognitive BCIs is that these systems need to learn and adapt over time. A static model might work okay for the first hour, but as the user's brain itself adapts, or as context changes, the BCI must keep up. Modern designs incorporate adaptive algorithms, Bayesian filters that update in real time, reinforcement learning agents that treat the whole problem like maximizing the user's cognitive score, and tweak stimulation policies to get better rewards, or simple feedback adjustments that gradually refine thresholds for each individual. The system might learn, for example, that your optimal focus EEG pattern is different from someone else's, or that you tend to zone out every 15 minutes, like clockwork, requiring a preemptive nudge at minute 14. Over time, the BCI becomes personalized, it knows your brain's language and speaks it more fluently. Intervention output module. When the moment is right, the system must act on the brain. Here we have options: stimulation, electrical, magnetic, maybe even ultrasound or light in experimental setups, is a direct way to influence neural activity. Alternatively, the system could provide feedback to the user, visual, auditory, haptic cues that guide the user to self-correct. Some futuristic enhancements might even adjust the external environment. Imagine a smart workspace that dims distractions or changes your computer's interface when you're overloaded, a form of neuroadaptive environment. Each output modality has pros and cons. Electrical or magnetic stimulation can directly boost or suppress activity in a network but carries the risk of side effects if done improperly. Sensory feedback relies on the user's brain to interpret the cue and adjust, which might be slower but can foster self-regulation skills. Some projects combine approaches. For instance, a system might both beep to alert you and also deliver a mild concurrent brain stimulus to jolt the relevant circuit. Closed-loop control and timing. A defining feature of these architectures is tight timing control. This cannot be overstated. Timing is critical. Neural oscillations and brain states create narrow windows of opportunity. If a system decides stimulation needed now, it has to execute with precision down to tens of milliseconds. Otherwise, that carefully identified theta phase or that memory encoding window passes. Some advanced systems use predictive models to anticipate the next wave cycle, so they can trigger stimulation that lands exactly on target. This is like throwing a dart not where the target is, but where it will be when the dart arrives. Achieving this requires fast signal processing, minimal lag in stimulation hardware, and sometimes clever algorithms that guess the immediate future of the brain's rhythm. The payoff is huge. Studies have shown that interventions timed to specific brain states, e.g., delivering a stimulus at the peak of a theta cycle vs the trough, can be the difference between improving performance or disrupting it. In closed-loop TMS experiments for memory, for example, stimulating aligned to a subject's endogenous theta phase produced memory gains, whereas the same stimulation out of sync did nothing or even hindered performance. The mantra for designers becomes right place, right time, or not at all. Supervisory and safety layer. Over it all, especially in human-oriented systems, is a supervisory module watching the watchers, so to speak. This layer accumulates data over longer periods to see if the interventions are actually helping. Is the user's performance improving? Any signs of fatigue or adverse effects building up? It can adjust global parameters, maybe dial down stimulation intensity if the user is showing signs of overarousal or headache, or adjust the feedback strategy if the user stops responding to it. Crucially, this is where safety constraints and ethical guardrails are enforced. For instance, the system might have a built-in limit on how much current it will ever deliver, or it may require periodic confirmation from the user that they want to continue, to ensure the user remains in control of the process. If any unusual patterns occur, say the algorithm is uncertain or the brain signals look atypical, the supervisory layer can flag it for human review or revert to a safe mode. In essence, this part of the design acknowledges that the goal is to help, not to override the user. The user's autonomy and well-being must remain central. User interface and transparency. Finally, an often overlooked but important component: how does all this appear to the user? For a BCI meant to enhance someone's cognition, having the user's trust is vital. People won't stick with a system if it feels like a mysterious black box zapping them unpredictably. So designers are exploring ways to make these systems transparent and user-friendly. Some prototypes come with a dashboard that visualizes your mental metrics. Over time, imagine seeing your focus level graph or memory performance, along with markers of when interventions happened. Others provide real-time explanations. You seemed fatigued, so I initiated a 5-second stimulation to your right DLPFC. This kind of transparency can actually enhance the enhancement, so to speak, because the user gains insight into their own cognition. It becomes a two-way street. The BCI helps the user, and the user, by observing the BCI's feedback, learns about their own mind and perhaps changes habits. In a way, a well-designed cognitive neuroprosthetic can act like a coach, not just a crutch, fostering better self-awareness in addition to immediate benefits. When you put all these pieces together, you get a sophisticated cognitive augmentation system that aspires to be both smart and subtle. It's not about blasting the brain with electricity to force a change, it's about a delicate dance between the machine and the mind. The best systems we envision are those that harmonize with the brain's natural patterns, nudging them in beneficial directions without drowning them out. In short, an ideal cognitive BCI enhances by collaborating, not by conquering. It's a partner to the brain, observing, learning, and assisting in a way that ultimately feels like an extension of yourself, rather than an intruder. Achieving that ideal is no small feat of engineering or neuroscience, but it's the guiding star for this field. From lab to life, case studies and real-world trials. Theory and design are all well and good, but do cognitive enhancement neuroprosthetics actually work in practice? The only way to know is through experiments and trials, ranging from tightly controlled lab studies to early real-world deployments. Let's explore a few illustrative examples across different cognitive domains and settings. These case studies will highlight both the promising successes and the challenges that remain. 1. Attention training with neurofeedback. We touched on this earlier, using EEG-based feedback to improve focus. Over the past 2 decades, numerous studies have tried this in various flavors. A classic scenario is having participants perform a tedious sustained attention task, like monitoring a radar screen or a long video for rare events, while wearing an EEG headset. The system monitors markers of attentional engagement in real time. For instance, a drop in midline frontal theta or a spike in mind-wandering alpha patterns can signal a lapse. At that moment, the user might receive a gentle alert, perhaps a brief tone or a vibration, bringing awareness back to the task. Some systems even use visual neurofeedback, like a gauge on screen that moves when your focus level changes, effectively letting you gamify your own brain state. One meta-analysis across many such studies found that healthy individuals can indeed improve their performance on attention tasks after training with EEG feedback. The improvements tend to be modest. We're not turning ADHD into superfocused overnight, but they are statistically reliable. Interestingly, these techniques have shown the most benefit for people who start out with below average attention, e.g. individuals with attention deficit difficulties. It's a bit like weight training. The smallest person in the gym stands to gain relatively more from a targeted regimen than someone who's already a bodybuilder. Importantly, in follow-ups done weeks later, people often retain some of the gains in focus, suggesting their brains actually formed new habits or connections. And when these systems are made engaging, say by incorporating them into video game-like environments, participants show even greater improvement. No surprise, a boring feedback task might not hold attention long enough to train attention. By turning it into a game, you keep people motivated and in that sweet spot of challenge where neuroplasticity thrives. 2. Working memory boosts in the lab. Moving to working memory, several invasive studies with human patients, usually epilepsy patients with electrodes temporarily implanted for monitoring, have reported notable boosts in short-term memory tasks using closed-loop stimulation. In one such study, participants did an NBAC task, remembering a sequence of letters or images and identifying when the current one matches one from n steps earlier, and a simple short-term recall task, like digit span. The researchers first recorded baseline neural activity during these tasks and identified patterns that predicted good performance, essentially mapping what a participant's brain looks like when their working memory is firing on all cylinders. Later, during test sessions, the BCI watched for deviations from that optimal pattern. The moment the participants' neural activity suggested they were struggling, say, the theta oscillations in PFC started to sputter, the system delivered a tiny electrical zap to the lateral PFC to try to sustain or resync the activity. The results were intriguing. On average, participants showed a 10 to 20% improvement in task performance with the closed-loop aid compared to sham conditions. They got more items correct without slowing their responses. And these improvements were highly timing-specific. The stimulation had to come at the right phase of the task, e.g., during the critical memory maintenance window, to be effective. If delivered at random times, it didn't help. Moreover, the effects varied between individuals. Those with lower baseline memory spans improved the most, again hinting at a ceiling effect. You can't boost someone much beyond their natural best without bigger interventions, but you can raise someone from subpar to normal more easily. This also underscores a practical point: personalization is key. The BCI had to tailor its model to each person's neural patterns. A one-size-fits-all approach would have missed these idiosyncratic optimal points. What about non-invasive memory enhancement? As mentioned, TDCS over prefrontal cortex has been a popular approach. People hoped that a mild direct current on the scalp could stimulate frontal lobe function and yield cognitive benefits. After many studies, the verdict is mixed. Some experiments showed small benefits in verbal working memory or multitasking after repeated TDCS sessions, while others found no effect at all. The inconsistency likely comes from differences in protocols and the simple fact that TDCS is a very blunt instrument. It's like trying to tune a piano with boxing gloves on. The currents are diffuse and relatively weak by the time they reach the brain. However, an interesting evolution is closed-loop TDCS. Instead of applying a constant current, researchers have started to modulate the TDCS in synchrony with the person's brain rhythms or cognitive state. For example, only ramp up the current when the person is actually in the encoding phase of a memory task, and turn it off during other phases. Early results suggest this targeted approach might salvage some efficacy out of TDCS, though it's still early days. Think of it as trading a constant dull push for a well-timed gentle nudge. The latter may be more effective for guiding the brain without causing it to adapt and ignore the stimulation. 3. Enhancing learning and skill acquisition. Cognitive enhancement isn't just about performing better in the moment, it can also be about learning faster and more robustly over time. One fascinating line of work involves monitoring brain signals to optimize learning experiences. For instance, a research team used functional near-infrared spectroscopy, FNIRS, a non-invasive optical method that measures blood flow changes in cortex, to monitor learners' mental state during a foreign language training program. FNIRS can infer if the prefrontal cortex is working hard or if the person might be overloaded. The BCI used this information to adapt the learning software in real time. If the learner showed signs of cognitive overload or waning engagement, the program would slow down, switch tactics, or provide a hint to keep the learner in the zone of proximal development, that sweet spot where material isn't too easy to be boring or too hard to be frustrating. The results were encouraging. Learners who used this neuroadaptive system retained more vocabulary and reported less mental fatigue than those with a one-size-fits-all training program. Essentially, by respecting the brain's natural learning rhythms, pushing when the user is ready, easing off when they're saturated, the system achieved better outcomes. It's a bit like having a personalized tutor who can sense when your brain is about to scream, "I need a break," even if you don't realize it. Similar adaptive approaches have been tested in other fields. Flight simulators that adjust difficulty based on the pilot trainee's brain signals of attention and stress. Math and science courses that use EEG to detect mind-wandering and inject interactive quizzes at just the right moment to re-engage students. Even surgical training where the simulator can sense when a resident is overwhelmed and slow down the scenario. All of these aim at the same principle: optimize the learning curve by monitoring brain state. It's not so much enhancement in the sci-fi sense as it is making our existing learning capacity more efficient by avoiding those periods of inefficiency, like slogging on when you're mentally exhausted or bored out of your skull. On the more futuristic end, DARPA, the patron of ambitious neurotech, funded a program called Targeted Neuroplasticity Training, TNT, that went a step further. Instead of reading brain state to adjust the task, it tried to directly stimulate peripheral nerves to put the brain into a hyperplastic state. By stimulating the vagus nerve, which influences the release of neuromodulators like acetylcholine and norepinephrine in the brain, the idea was to chemically prime the brain for learning, like giving the neural equivalent of a motivational speech and an energy drink before each class. The hope was that pairing vagus nerve stimulation with training sessions would accelerate acquisition of complex skills, foreign languages, marksmanship, etc. Some animal studies showed promising results in boosting learning rates, though translating that to consistent human gains has proven tricky so far. Still, it's a compelling approach. Rather than target the specific skill circuits, target the global plasticity and attention systems to supercharge the brain's general learning mode. Early human trials have had mixed outcomes, some showing faster learning on certain tasks, others not much effect, indicating that if this works, it's going to need very careful tuning, and likely won't be a universal magic source for any kind of learning. 4. Preventing cognitive failures in high-stakes environments. Not all enhancement is about pushing the brain above normal, sometimes it's about keeping the brain at its best under pressure. Think of scenarios like air traffic control, military operations, or emergency medicine. Here, a momentary lapse in attention or working memory can be literally the difference between life and death. Researchers are developing BCIs that serve as a kind of cognitive guardian angel in these settings. These systems continuously monitor for signs of trouble, rising fatigue, overload, loss of situational awareness. If detected, the system can take action, perhaps reallocate tasks, like an autopilot kicking in or an AI assistant handling routine parts of the job, alert a supervisor, or prompt the individual to take a quick break or use a compensatory strategy. A classic example comes from a DARPA-funded project for intelligence analysts. Analysts were watching drone surveillance feeds, a notoriously dull task with rare critical events. The trick was that sometimes the analyst's brain noticed a target, like a vehicle of interest, in the periphery, generating a subconscious recognition signal, AP300 wave, a kind of aha brain signature, even if the analyst didn't consciously mark it. The BCI system picked up these fleeting P300 signals from the analyst's EEG in real time. Whenever the brain's pattern suggested, I think there was something important there, but the conscious mind might have missed it, the system would flag that segment of footage for closer review. Essentially, it's catching those blink-and-you-miss-it moments by reading the brain's first impressions. This dramatically improved target detection rates, especially as hours went on and human vigilance would normally decline. It's like a second pair of eyes, except the eyes are your own, and the second pair is a computer that never gets tired of watching. What's remarkable here is that the user didn't have to do anything differently. There was no training required, no effort to control the BCI, it was entirely passive and behind the scenes. The enhancement came from the seamless integration of brain monitoring with task support. In a sense, the analyst's performance was augmented without them even being aware of it in the moment. The system scooped up the brain's implicit knowledge and acted on it. This kind of passive BCI could be the most scalable form of cognitive enhancement. Imagine cars that monitor your brain for distraction and then alert you or even slow down. Or an email client that senses you're mentally fatigued and suggests pausing that fiery reply until you're fresh, saving many a career, no doubt. 5. The elephant in the room, companies and ongoing trials. It's worth noting that beyond academic and military research, private companies and startups are actively pursuing cognitive BCIs. For instance, Neuralink, while primarily known for its goal of helping paralyzed patients communicate or control prosthetics, is very much interested in long-term enhancement possibilities. Elon Musk often speaks of conceptual telepathy, the idea that two people could share complex thoughts directly brain-to-brain via high-bandwidth implants. While that's still firmly theoretical, Neuralink's technology, thousands of channels of high-resolution recording and stimulation, could in the future be applied to decoding internal speech or thoughts and even writing information into the brain. One could imagine a far future Neuralink-like device that helps you search your memory as effortlessly as Googling your brain, or that augments your decision-making by communicating silently with an AI assistant. These are far-out ideas, but the hardware being developed now is what might enable them decades down the line. On a different front, companies like Kernel are betting on non-invasive tech for cognitive enhancement and monitoring. Kernel has developed wearable devices, helmets, essentially, that use time-domain functional near-infrared spectroscopy and EEG to measure brain activity with much higher precision than a simple gym EEG headband. Their vision involves using these devices to track cognitive health and performance, potentially giving users feedback about their focus, stress, or memory in real time, sort of like a Fitbit for the brain. While primarily positioned for research and wellness, such tools edge into the enhancement territory when they start actively guiding users to better habits or mental states throughout the day. Even the world of consumer tech saw a wave of brain boosters. Companies like Halo Neuroscience sold neurostimulation headsets claiming to improve learning of motor skills, popular with some athletes and gamers, and a startup called Hum developed a forehead patch delivering gentle electrical currents that supposedly improved working memory during use. The science behind some of these consumer devices can be thin, and the FDA has been cautious, but they indicate a strong public interest. Many folks won't wait for ultimate proof. The allure of a cognitive edge leads to a lot of self-experimentation. If you've ever seen a student with a homemade TDCS kit trying to cram for exams, you know what I mean. This makes it all the more important that solid science and rigorous trials guide the development of enhancement BCIs, lest people harm themselves or chase snake oil. In summary, the experimental literature so far paints a picture of cautious optimism. We have proof of concept successes, focus can be sharpened a bit, memory can be boosted under certain conditions, learning can be tuned, and disastrous lapses can be averted, all via neurotechnology. But these gains are often context-dependent and can be modest. No one is downloading calculus into their brain in 30 seconds, Matrix style, just yet. The variability is high. One person's miracle focus aid might do zilch for another if their brain dynamics differ. We're also just beginning to understand why some of these interventions work when they do. Often we have empirical results, e.g., 35% memory improvement with a hippocampal prosthetic in a small trial, but only speculative explanations of the neural mechanism. That's where ongoing neuroscience research intersects with the engineering. Figuring out the why will help make the how more effective. Another trend is clear: the most effective systems tend to be the most adaptive and responsive. The brute force approaches, constant stimulation, generic solutions, often fall flat or see diminishing returns. In contrast, the ones that listen closely, respect the brain's rhythms, and tailor their actions, those stand out as successes. This reinforces a kind of philosophical point: enhancing the brain is less about power and more about precision. We likely don't need to override the brain with massive interventions, we need to guide it with a careful hand at the right moments. The brain wants to operate well. After all, evolution has optimized it for survival in complex environments. We just have to help it along when it falters or when we ask it to do tasks it didn't evolve to do, like watch boring radar screens or memorize hundreds of abstract facts with no emotional context. Risks, ethics, and the fine line between help and harm. Now that we've seen the exciting possibilities, we must address the proverbial elephant in the room. What are the risks and ethical quandaries of cognitive neuroprosthetics? When you start tinkering with the knobs and dials of the mind, you inevitably raise questions about safety, identity, fairness, and more. A PhD-level audience is no stranger to these discussions, so let's dive into them with nuance, and maybe a touch of humor, because if we're literally losing our minds, we might as well laugh. Unintended side effects. The brain is not a simple machine, and cognitive functions are deeply interconnected. Boosting one aspect of cognition could inadvertently impair another. For example, there's speculation, and some anecdotal evidence, that enhancing working memory too much might reduce creativity or heuristic thinking. You become so laser-focused and detail-oriented that you can't see the forest for the trees. It's like overclocking a computer. You get more speed, but maybe the system becomes unstable in other ways. In one case, a trial of deep brain stimulation, DBS, for enhancing memory reported that a few participants started experiencing weird mood swings and in one instance, a heightened aggression during the stimulation periods. It's a reminder that when you send electricity into the brain, you're never affecting just one thing in isolation. The current spread, networks are dynamic. A stim meant to improve memory circuits might also be tickling parts of the amygdala or hypothalamus, perhaps increasing anxiety or stress. Even less invasive methods like TACS can have off-target effects. A person using TACS to improve focus might later report trouble sleeping that night. Did the entrained rhythms disturb their natural sleep spindle patterns? We have to consider these possibilities. Continuous neurofeedback might make someone hyper-aware of their own mental state to an unhealthy degree, so-called neurofeedback anxiety, where a person gets anxious about any fluctuation in their brain metrics. And, of course, if a device malfunctions or is miscalibrated, it could actively impair cognition or induce headaches, fatigue, or worse. This is why that supervisory safety layer in design is critical, and why clinical trials for enhancement in healthy folks are approached very carefully. No one wants a scenario where a brain enhancement turns into a brain impairment or triggers a psychiatric symptom. Dependency and altered autonomy. Suppose a cognitive prosthetic does work really well for you. Maybe it's a little implanted chip that keeps your attention sharp through long work days. That sounds great, but what happens when you take it away? There's a real concern about dependency, both psychological and physiological. The brain could get used to the crutch and dial down its own effort. Think of how people who overuse GPS might lose some innate navigation skills, or how relying on Google for memory means we don't bother remembering things. If a student studies for exams always using a focus-boosting neurofeedback, will they struggle disproportionately in its absence? We might create a cohort of people who need their cognitive enhancer to function at baseline, an ironic reversal where the enhancement just becomes needed to be normal, due to tolerance effects or learned dependency. This is reminiscent of stimulants for ADHD, very helpful when used correctly, but some worry that long-term use may alter the developing brain's own regulatory mechanisms. On the autonomy front, there's the eerie question of who is steering the ship when a BCI is intervening. Ideally, these systems are cooperative, they help you do what you want to do, focus on that book, remember that name, etc. But one can imagine creepier scenarios. What if an employer mandates a certain cognitive BCI for all employees, to ensure productivity? Suddenly you have an external entity dictating that everyone's brain be modulated in a certain way during work hours. Even if the intentions are benign, avoid accidents, increase output, it raises issues of consent and free will. Are you really choosing to work hard, or is the device making you? It's a sci-fi trope, often a nightmare scenario, that people might be controlled via brain tech. We are thankfully not anywhere close to that level of mind control, but subtle shifts are possible. For instance, a focus enhancement could dampen mind wandering, but what if some of those wandering moments were when your mind hashed out a creative idea or recognized a moral qualm about what you're doing? There's a fine line between helping someone stay on task and suppressing a part of their personality or free thought. Privacy and cognitive surveillance. BCIs that monitor cognitive state inevitably collect a lot of data about what's happening in your head. Even if it's not mind reading in the science fiction sense, patterns of attention, fatigue, emotional arousal, maybe even recognition of certain stimuli, like the P300 detecting you saw something meaningful, are being recorded. This raises neuroprivacy concerns. Who owns that data? Is it stored securely? Could it be misused? Say, an insurance company gets a hold of cognitive performance metrics and decides to adjust your premiums, or a hacker intercepts your focus data and weirdly figures out when you're most vulnerable to an impulse purchase. These may sound far-fetched, but when Facebook, just as an example, was researching brain typing interfaces, privacy advocates immediately voiced worries. Do we really want big tech listening in on our neural signals? They already get so much information from clicks and likes, brain data feels like a step too far. We must ensure that any cognitive enhancement device gives the user ultimate control over what is shared and with whom. Perhaps all the processing should happen locally on a device that you own, with minimal data going to any cloud. And any cloud data should be encrypted and anonymized. Ethicists also suggest a right to cognitive liberty, essentially, an individual's right to think freely without being nudged or monitored without consent. Cognitive enhancement tools should be opt-in and transparent. You should always know when your brain state is being tracked and have the ability to disconnect it. The specter of a dystopia where companies or governments require citizens to use cognitive enhancers to enforce certain mental states must be guarded against from the get-go. Fairness and societal impact. Let's assume these enhancements really take off and become effective. We then face a societal question. Who gets access to them? If only the wealthy can afford pricey brain implants or advanced neurofeedback training, we risk widening the cognitive gap. The term neurodiversity usually refers to naturally occurring differences in brains, but here we might introduce engineered cognitive inequality. Imagine a future college entrance exam where the top scorers all had memory boosts from a device. Does that pressure everyone to get one to keep up? It could start as voluntary but become quasi-mandatory in competitive fields. We've seen analogous things with other tech, for instance, the advantage that high-speed internet gave to certain students for online learning. With BCIs, it's even more personal and consequential. There's also the ethical line between therapy and enhancement that society will have to navigate. Treating an Alzheimer's patient's memory loss with a hippocampal implant is one thing. Most people support using tech to restore normal function. But what about giving a healthy engineer a memory boost so they can handle more complex projects? Or giving executives a focus implant so they can work 20-hour days? Some ethicists worry this could create pressure to enhance, workers feeling compelled to get an implant or stimulation regimen just to not fall behind enhanced colleagues. It opens questions about bodily autonomy. Do you have the right to remain unenhanced in a world where that's a disadvantage, and even what it means to earn achievements? Did you solve that tough problem, or did your implanted AI sidekick do it? We might see new regulatory approaches. Perhaps cognitive enhancers will be regulated like drugs, requiring demonstration of safety and efficacy. Or maybe like glasses and laser eye surgery, an optional upgrade you can do, with some oversight but largely personal choice. It's interesting to note that society has accepted certain enhancements. Caffeine use is rampant and encouraged. LASIK to get better than 20/20th's vision for a fighter pilot is fine, whereas others are taboo. Steroids in sports, for example, because they give an unfair edge and have health risks. Where will neural enhancements fall on that spectrum? Likely, the tolerance will depend on context and risk. Non-invasive, low-risk aids might become as common as smartwatches, while invasive surgical implants purely for enhancement will probably be slow to gain acceptance except perhaps in niche tech enthusiast communities initially. Identity and the self. A more philosophical but important consideration is how these technologies might alter one's sense of self. Our cognitive traits, memory, attention span, creativity, even quirks like how our mind wanders, are part of what make us who we are. If you start altering those through technology, do you feel like the same person? If a device constantly redirects my attention, am I still me, or some cyborg hybrid of me and the device's algorithm? Users of deep brain stimulators for Parkinson's have sometimes reported personality changes and a feeling that their true self was altered by the stimulation. This is rare, but documented in cases where stimulation for depression, for instance, made people feel too happy in a way they described as inauthentic. With cognitive enhancements, the changes might be subtler but still significant. Maybe I've always been a bit scatterbrained but also very creative. Now I'm super organized and focused thanks to a device, but I notice I've lost some of my imaginative daydreams. Some might welcome that trade-off, others might feel a loss. The fine line between help and harm often comes down to such subjective judgments. It will be essential that cognitive neuroprosthetics come with off switches, both literal and figurative. Users should be able to take breaks, revert to their UN-augmented state, and truly consent to when they are being augmented. In an ideal world, these tools remain tools under our control, like a bicycle we can hop on or off, rather than becoming an inseparable part of our cognition that could override our natural inclinations. Finally, a dash of humor to wrap this heavy section. A colleague once joked that with all these enhancements, the future grad student might have an AI in their ear, a BCI on their head, vagus nerve stimulators on their neck, all just to write a thesis while simultaneously analyzing 5 datasets and tweeting intellectually. The real unintended consequence. Extreme bragging rights at conference social events. Oh, you still use coffee to stay awake. Cute. I run on 2 mA transcranial stimulation and pure willpower. In truth, the goal is not to turn us into competitive cyborgs, it's to alleviate genuine bottlenecks in human cognition that hold us back or cause suffering. If done right, cognitive neuroprosthetics could help level the playing field. Imagine bridging attention gaps for those with ADHD without drugs, or giving everyone an easier time learning complex skills, and unlock creativity and productivity in ways that benefit society. If done poorly, they could exacerbate disparities or infringe on what we cherish about being human. The road ahead thus requires not just technical genius but also wisdom and oversight. Engineers will push the envelope of what's possible, scientists will continue to unravel how the brain achieves its stunning feats, and ethicists, regulators, and society at large will need to guide how we integrate these powers into our lives. It's an exciting journey, one that blurs the line between healing and enhancing, between the natural and the artificial. As we stand at this frontier, our touchstone should be that these technologies serve humanity's deepest interests. A cognitive enhancement should expand freedom, capability, or well-being, not diminish them. In closing, neuroprosthetics for cognitive enhancement show immense promise. They're taking us from a world where we could only wish for a better brain, into a world where we might actively build one. The science is young, the tech is evolving, and yes, there are many challenges to sort out. But witnessing a successful demo, like a person's memory measurably improving thanks to a well-timed hippocampal pulse, or a pilot avoiding error because their brain state triggered assistance, it's hard not to feel that spark of wonder. It recalls the early days of neuroprosthetics, when people marveled at a robotic arm moving via thought. Now we marvel at the prospect of thought itself becoming sharper, clearer, more resilient through similar means. As we venture forward, let's do so with curiosity, caution, and maybe a dash of humor. After all, the brain is a mysterious and sometimes humorous place, and now it's becoming our playground for innovation.